This unit is all about photosynthesis, and then from here we're going to also talk about cellular respiration. We'll split them up into two separate units, but we also want to remember as we're going through this unit that they are interdependent. Without photosynthesis, we couldn't have cellular respiration. So to start this unit off, let's look at the equation for photosynthesis. And remember, we've got two sides to an equation, just like you were doing math. And if you look at the very top of your notes packet, you can fill this in along with the video. And on the left side, we have our reactants, and we know that we need water, okay, and carbon dioxide in order for plants to create glucose. But in order to do that, they have to have sunlight energy. Okay, remember that this sun just doesn't represent sunlight, which it is, but it's a form of chemical energy that is eventually going to be turned into an organic molecule. And that organic molecule is glucose. And then we end up with another product. Remember, the right side of our equation are the products, what comes out of the equation. We also have oxygen, which is going to be let out of the cells. Now, this is good for a basic equation, but when we look at it a little bit more closely, we need to understand, well, where did these 6 carbons come from in glucose? We've got 12 hydrogens and 6 oxygens. Well, if you do the math right now, it doesn't add up. So for this equation to actually take place, to make one glucose molecule, we need 6 water molecules, 6 carbon dioxide molecules, and we'll end up with 1 glucose molecule and 6 oxygen molecules. All right, that's what we would call a balanced equation. If you go on and take chemistry, you'll have to balance equations in the future, but for our purposes, you just need to remember where those 6's go, and you need to know that we need 6 water, 6 carbon dioxide in order to make 1 glucose molecule. The next thing we need to talk about with photosynthesis, and it's going to be really important when we talk about the cellular respiration equation, is this formation of ATP. We're actually going to watch this video here, and then we'll do the notes afterwards.
ATP and chemical energy. Objective: to learn how ATP.
A little technical difficulty with the computer, but let's try that again and see if we can get this to work this time.
ATP and chemical energy. Objective: to learn how ATP provides chemical energy in living organisms. Living things need chemical fuel in order for the release of energy to occur. One of the chemical substances used by cells as their basic energy source is adenosine triphosphate, commonly abbreviated as ATP. Mitochondria, the largest of the cell organelles, are bound by 2 membranes. The outer membrane is smooth, while the inner membrane has many inward folds known as cristae. On the cristae, sugar is combined with oxygen to produce ATP. ATP consists of the organic base adenine, the 5-carbon sugar, ribose, and 3 phosphate groups. There is a second chemical substance, adenosine diphosphate, abbreviated as ADP, which contains only 2 phosphate groups, instead of the 3 found in ATP. When a cell has available energy, it can store it in the form of a phosphate group, adding to the ADP molecule and producing ATP. ADP is something like a partially charged battery. As a phosphate group is added to it, it will become ATP, now fully charged. When the cell requires energy for its metabolic processes, ATP will react with water, and its outer phosphate group will break off, triggering the release of energy. When one molecule of ATP is hydrolyzed, about 30 kilojoules of energy will be released. ATP is a molecule efficient in the release of energy, but not in its storage. By comparison, a single molecule of glucose can store almost 100 times the energy stored in ATP. Summary: adenosine triphosphate, ATP, is the substance that stores and releases energy in cells. ATP consists of adenosine, ribose, and 3-phosphate groups. It is through the hydrolysis of ATP that energy is released. Energy is stored by adding a phosphate group to ADP.
If we go back to our notes now and we look at what ATP is, you just saw that we had the molecule and how much energy it's going to produce. ATP is short for adenosine triphosphate. Go ahead and write that in on your notes. And it's made up of 3 different parts. This first molecule over here, and these are all organic molecules, okay, that's why we have these different shapes, is adenine. And you should recognize this pentose as ribose. And then we've got our phosphate groups on the end. And it's called adenosine triphosphate because we've got the 3 phosphates, that's the triphosphate. But adenine and ribose together is called adenosine. ADP is adenosine diphosphate. And we have the same structure. We've got our adenine, our ribose, that's going to make up our adenosine, and then we've got our phosphate groups. The difference here, though, is that that 3rd phosphate is gone. So what happens is, as ATP is used, it becomes ADP, and then that ADP will then again go pick up another phosphate, and it's a cycle so that it's constantly storing energy. And what happens is when that phosphate group breaks off of this chain, there's actually a lot of energy that's going to be released when that bond is broken. It's kind of like if you were to take a pencil and snap it in half and you hear that loud crack. Well, when that bond breaks off, it's kind of like a boom. There's a release of energy that goes along with it. So if we look at that cycle a little closer, we've got our ATP, you see our 3 phosphates, and we've got our ADP, our 2 phosphates, and eventually, right, we've got that 3rd phosphate that's going to break off. And you see that this is a continuous cycle. And what happens is during photosynthesis, okay, we are going to have this process happen, and it's going to use energy. So it's going to take that ATP, it's going to break off that phosphate, and it becomes ADP. Well, then this molecule is going to go elsewhere in the cell, pick up the energy that's made in cellular respiration, and it returns it to ATP. Okay, so this is a continuous cycle, and we say that photosynthesis and respiration are interdependent because in order to get energy, glucose needs to be made. You saw the difference there with how many kilojoules are actually let out of one glucose molecule. And so photosynthesis is going to create that glucose molecule, which then will be broken down in cellular respiration to release the energy that's actually trapped inside. So it's actually usable for the cell. And we can use our battery analogy if we were to talk about ADP as our partially charged battery and ATP as our fully charged battery. So we can go back here. If you want to go ahead and draw in a battery, we can do that. So we can say that ATP, if we were to draw a little battery here, right, a little top, ATP is like our fully charged battery. And ADP, and we'll draw that over here, is like our partially charged battery. So it has the potential to have lots of energy, but it needs to pick up that phosphate in order to do that, and then it'll store it and it'll be fully charged again. So the next thing we'll be talking about is the different reactions, but this gives you an idea of that really, really important molecule that is needed in order for these other processes to take place. And we talked about metabolism at the beginning of the year. So, we talked about these processes that an organism needs to carry out in order to survive. Well, this is one of them. It needs to be able to make this energy conversion, and it creates molecules in one reaction that can be used in other reactions.